Hello and welcome to a brand new show. Starting today, next half an hour with me, Nikunj Dalmia. Markets and macro. It's all about you and me, or it's all about us. When I say you, well, we will be taking viewer questions. Us, because the idea is very simple. We want all of us and India and Indians to succeed when it comes to the journey of wealth creation. India is rising. Are you rising with it? The channel logo of your favorite channel, ET Now. And that's the essence of your show. We'll interact, we'll answer queries, we'll make it more personalized, we'll talk about trends, and we'll talk about macros. So keep it simple, markets and macro, it's about you and me. Keep our queries going, keep your questions coming, we'll encourage them on the show. Even though the name of the show is Markets and Macro, today we are starting a show remembering an extraordinary gentleman. If a pantheon of great investors is ever to be made, one name will always find itself on the pedestal. That's Charlie Munger. World will remember him as a great investor, but those who've studied his life, followed him over the years, understood his philosophy. Charlie was just not an investor. Of course, he was a capitalist by mind, but he was a true gentleman at heart. It is so simple. You spend less than you earn. Invest shrewdly. Avoid toxic people and toxic activities and try and keep learning at all age of your life. And if you do all these things, you're almost certain to succeed. And if you don't, you're going to need a lot of luck. And that's what Charlie did. He believed in keeping simple. Simple ideology, simple approach, no benchmarks, no comparison, a happy state of mind, and grit which was extraordinary. For a man who was broke in his 30s, for a man who lost his one eye when he was in 30s, for a man who had to bury his son, history is remembering him as one of the greatest human beings. Many call him as the right hand of Warren Buffett, someone who influenced Buffett a lot, the greatest investor on the earth. He told Buffett one simple thing, keep it simple. But instead of focusing on cigar butt investing, which you learned from Benjamin Graham, you need to focus on buying good companies at a reasonable price. And then try to be permanent owners. Because when you're buying a business, you're trying to buy, when you're investing in a stock, essentially you're buying a piece of business. And that's what Charlie always did. One of my favorite quotes is, and I think of you and have to learn and live through it. Charlie was a constant learning machine, always kept on learning, had always books where he went. Free time, busy time. Even if he had anything to talk about, it was always in his circle of competence. So while world remembers him as Warren Buffett's partner, but I think he should be remembered as a man with extraordinary foresight, a student of human philosophy, and an extraordinary gentleman when it comes to compassion and care for others. And my guest on the show today is someone who has called him the modern Rishi. In one of his talks at Flame University, Vallabh Bhanshali said that if you have to identify the modern Rishis of today's capitalist world, Charlie Munger would be right up there. Mr. Bhanshali, we've learned a lot from you, but you've always said that Charlie Munger has been one of your teachers. You've called him the modern Rishi, and that's how I think the world would like to remember him.
Absolutely. It's a day of sadness because he died 100 years too soon. But it's also a day of extreme gratitude for the impact that he has had on the world and personally on me. It seems that I took some early decisions in life which got vindicated or which got reinforced when I came in contact with Charlie Munger's thought and life. And for the last at least almost 30, 35 years, he's been a constant source of inspiration, teaching, and practical decisions in life. I heard your comments about Charlie Munger, but many times, on a day like this, they sound like, people may not pay attention. They seem more emotion than rational. But he was the greatest rationalist of his time. and someone whose life reflected all his teaching, which doesn't always happen. So he said learning means living, and he was an epitome of that. So you can't stop talking about Charlie Munger and his influence on my life, or almost all of us at NM.
Mr. Bhansali, one of his most prominent teachings was be prepared and keep it simple, something which you always alluded to in your life. If you don't understand a problem, invert it. Would you like to elaborate on these points which you often revert to, something which you've learned from Mr. Munger?
So, we heard about he being a gentleman and how seriously they took promise. People often fail to understand that someone who have a tremendous track record of producing a return on capital, they kept $100 to $150 billion of cash on their balance sheet. And people wouldn't believe it when they said that, look, if a flood occurs once in 100 years, they want to be prepared for it. So that's the seriousness with which they took their promise and this principle of being prepared. On a balance sheet of some $500 billion, keeping as much as $150, $60 billion cash, varying amounts, it would fluctuate. But that is it. But that happens when you want to keep it simple, you take a few principles in life and take them to extreme. And they said they did the same thing in the world of investment. If they found a simple idea, they kept investing in it, or they remained invested. I think one of the most famous bets which came later in life and which seemed against what they used to say, we don't understand technology, was their bet on Apple. And almost 25% of their portfolio today consists of Apple. They understood Apple, it was simple, and they kept investing. So even in the fluctuation that we saw in the last 2-3 years, their confidence never shook. So they were prepared about understanding, where this business is going. When Steve Jobs left, their confidence did not shake at all because they understood the business that well. So Munger Saab lived his life exactly as what he said in his various comments. And this alignment of, what you say and what you do, Buddha said, is the essence of being a great spiritual person, the person who eventually gets liberated. This alignment is so critical. So what you said, keep it simple. Apple was a very fine example. And then, remaining prepared all the time, irrespective of what happened. We saw in 2008 how prepared they were. When amongst the smartest companies in the world, Goldman Sachs was in trouble, all they needed was to place a phone call to Munger and to Buffett, and then he discussed with Munger. And the next day they had a deal sheet with someone as smart as Goldman Sachs, and how much money they made on Goldman Sachs. So they were always prepared. They waited for a simple idea. One idea which I think I must also express here is the thinking about simplicity. Munger Saab said that if I can jump over a 1-foot hurdle, why go over a 6 feet? More educated we are, we think we are smarter when we do complicated things. We complicate things to look smart. He worked the other way around. And there were few people as learned as Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. So, saying one thing, remembering him, and living it are quite different. They lived it, and I think all those people benefit immensely who try and live by those principles. Living by them is the important thing.
It is difficult to live by principles of Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. They are so simple. Buy a good company, buy when there is fear, don't look at the short term, think long term, and you will generate wealth. It's a very simple principle, yet a difficult one to follow. Why is it so difficult to implement, sir?
People don't want to work. People don't want to prepare themselves. These gentlemen said that the week in which they have no meetings and they can, read all 5 days is the most efficient day for them. So this is their commitment to being prepared. And they think we don't know enough anytime. One thing that, it is interesting and so inspiring. Munger Saab said, his insight was, they were mighty impressed by a book on incentives by C.L. Denny. And they said, oh, everything in the world is driven by incentives. To understand what incentives are working for people they deal with, Munger Sahib developed this concept of called mental model. That when an architect comes and looks at your house, he has a very different mental model in his mind. And when he proposes terms, or when he makes recommendations also, you do not understand them fully, and then you have disputes or unhappiness. So, happiness is not an accident for them. It was calculated. For that, he said, I must understand various mental models of different people and professions. And how many did he learn about? 500 of them. This is a rough number, but 500 of them. And he's talked about it. And one of his pupils has, followed him and learned about 250 of them. So this is the preparation. And people are not ready to do it. We study a little and we are in a great hurry to show off that, oh, I know this and I know that, and make opinions and give opinions. So I think that is the tough part, Nikunj, that people don't want to put in hard work. They were ready, they enjoyed, all their studies and all the preparation.
Mr. Bhanshali, Mr. Munger also insisted on not just reading about the world of investment. He spoke extensively about the need to understand psychology, philosophy, art, literature. Do you think it's a 360-degree approach which I think would differentiate an ordinary investor from an extraordinary investor now?
So this is the 500 mental models, so-called. And at Flame, we have introduced that program. How do I understand what the other person is saying unless I understand the mindset from which that person is acting or saying anything? This is a simple observation. And you come across it daily between men and women, parents and children, etc. But we don't want to do anything about it. And once you recognize that, then every subject in the world is relevant to you, not only interesting, but relevant to you. And look at where is this coming from? They didn't want to retain any investors' money and they wanted to give back all the money. But some investors continued to remain invested. And how seriously they took that responsibility right until the last day that Mr. Munger lived, and Mr. Buffett will continue to follow their principles. Out of that fiduciary relationship that these people trust us, they don't want to go away, we got to work very hard. And let me juxtapose this to make this point sharper. Mr. Munger was asked, what are your portfolio returns? He said, I don't compute. I have more money than I care, more money than I deserve. So whether my portfolio is compounding at 5% or 7% or 15%, I am in no competition. We all know his sharpness, so he would have the math. But his attitude towards it was this. He said, if we are working this hard, whether it was Daily Journal or Westco or at Berkshire, it was their sense of fiduciary, that, oh, we got to do the best for our people. So can you imagine these two great men working hard till the last day of their, Mr. Munger up to the last day, 10 days back he gave this interview and, we can see sharpness, etc. Out of that sense of fiduciary, where do you find such people? So when you have, it is not easy for people because they don't pause and reflect. When you become a trustee, you become better. People don't want to be trusted. And the rewards of a trustee are that you become so good at what you're doing. These people are fine examples of that trusteeship. And the second thing, maybe, is how compounding happens out of this. I have a painting which is rather famous now in the world, where I say that compounding is everything. Yes. And it's not as difficult as one may think. Mr. Munger thought about compounding, I think, to an extreme level. So when he says, I keep it simple, invest in a good company, how many levels of compounding he thought of? And he said that, look, a good company cannot be a good company unless it knows how to deal with suppliers, how to deal with customers, how to deal with employees, how to deal with regulators. And they will build trust with all of that. And that trust reduces the cost of their relationship in their supplies, in what they buy, what they sell, in the employee relationship, etc., etc., etc. It's compounding at various levels. People have petty minds. For small things, they break a relationship. And the fact that these two people remained friends, lived in modest houses, it was all that simplicity as a great, great compounder. You don't take decisions on what clothes I wear, what cars I use, what house I live in, what office I work out of. It just didn't bother them at all. This is the idea taken to the limit. So I think studying Mr. Munger's life should be made mandatory in our schools and colleges. And as you mature, you need to study this as you're developing your maturity. You have to read it again and again and again.
Well, such a pleasure to have you, Mr. Bhanshali, on ET now today and talk about the modern rishi, as you have called Mr. Munger. I must, share it with our viewers that Mr. Munger has influenced everyone's thinking, but Vallabh Bhanshali is someone who has totally influenced a lot of thinking for me and for a lot of our viewers with the simplicity with which he has always conveyed the message of simplicity, spirituality, and compounding. So thank you very much, Mr. Bhanshali. Today we are remembering, the guru of all, Mr. Munger, but on my screen is also one of the gurus, Mr. Bhanshali, whom I have learned a lot from. So thank you very much.
Very kind of you. Thank you.